My guest today, CJ, we're going to come in and we're going to talk a little bit about a whole bunch of different things, but we're going to talk maybe a little bit about breast binding and the history behind that a tiny bit, and we'll see where things go from there. She's a wealth of knowledge and just a vibrant being. So we'll go ahead and just welcome in CJ. CJ,
Hi,
welcome to the show.
thank you so much for having me on today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I'm glad that you could find some time in the schedule.
Right. Well, you were talking about breast binding there, and that is a subject that has become pretty close to the kind of research I do, because as a two-time breast cancer survivor and BBC trained journalist, I've done a significant amount of research into the causes of cancer. And I wrote a self-help memoir, My Wild Ride, How to Thrive After Breast Cancer and Infidelity. It came out in October of last year, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And it not only includes humor and cartoons, but also a lot of research. The bibliography, for example, references nearly 70 books and more than 100 articles and studies. And one very important book that I read as part of my research was the second edition of Dressed to Kill. And here it is, Dressed to Kill, the link between breast cancer and bras. And it was written by Sidney Ross Singer and his wife, Soma Gristmeyer. And it presents compelling evidence that the link between breast cancer and bras is stronger than that between smoking and lung cancer. Wow. And
Wow.
I describe the issue in a lot of detail in my book, and also I have a blog about it called Say No to Bras, Can Bras Cause Breast Cancer? That's on my website, which you can find by going to cjauthor.com. But the fact is this: given that the potential damage that bras may cause, I am very concerned about the current fashion for non-binary, gender fluid, biological females to bind their breasts because, there they are, they're young girls whose bodies are still developing. And if bras can cause breast cancer, binding your breasts is like bras on steroids.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just such a, for me, it's a no-brainer. I mean,
Yeah,
to
yeah. And
be holding yourself in like that. Didn't we give up corsets a long time ago?
well, that's true, and I love antiquarian books, and I had a wonderful book from the 1890s, and it seemed to me that the arguments against corsets, how women at the turn of that century, at the end of the 1800s, were wearing these corsets to have a wasp waist. Okay. And that wasp waist was supposed to be very beautiful. And these women suffered all kinds of health problems from wearing them. I think the technical term that they used in those days was chlorosis. And I don't know if you have that available, but I actually found a poem in this book from the 1890s called The Amusing Journal. And it's a beautiful poem that tells you how damaging corsets are in two verses. And the first verse is shaped like a woman's body when she's wearing these corsets. And the second verse is shaped like a normal lady's body, which is much more healthy. And if you look at what it says, I can read it out. The first verse is this: "This is the shape of a woman's waist, on which a corset tight is laced. The ribs, deformed by being squeezed, press on the lungs till they're diseased. The heart is jammed and cannot pump. The liver is a torpid lump. The stomach crushed, cannot digest, and in a mess are all compressed." There we go, and we have it's unbelievable what this says. Therefore, this silly woman grows to be a fearful mass of woes, but thinks she has a lovely shape, though hideous as a crippled ape. And this is the second verse, which shows you a much more natural shape of the woman's body. "This is a woman's natural waist, which corset never yet disgraced. In sight, it is a mine of health, outside of charms, it has a wealth. It is a thing of beauty true, and a sweet joy forever new. It needs no artful padding vile, or battle big to give it style. It's strong and solid, plump and sound, and hard to get one arm around. Alas, if women only knew the mischief that these corsets do, they'd let Dame Nature have her way, and never try her waist to stay. So I love that poem. And to be honest, that's exactly what is happening with these breast binders. And in fact, there was a study that was done in 2017 on the health impacts of chest binding among transgender adults. It was published in the journal Culture, Health and Sexuality. And it found that 97% of the 1,800 participants who bound their chest daily had at least one negative symptom. And the side effects they reported included back and chest pain, shortness of breath, a buildup of fluid in the lungs, reduced exercise tolerance, and even broken ribs, and that doesn't even account for how they could be getting cancer a few years down the line, because cancer takes a few years to develop. And so, you see inexpensive breast binders available from a variety of retailers, including, say, Target, Amazon, and none of them are mentioning any potential health issues in any of those listings. So I think that it would be really good for women, and especially young girls with developing breasts, to think twice before wearing these breast binders.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what a trip that our society has played on the minds of women, on the way that they apparently supposed to look according to the eyes of pop culture, and now with this confusing of genders, even using hormone blockers to stop the development. I mean, it doesn't seem that it seems that the image, the view of how a woman's body should look has nothing to do with a healthy approach whatsoever.
Yeah, and there's one thing I do want to mention, just still on the subject of bras and breast cancer, because there is an awful lot of research out there that shows this to be a pretty compelling truth. However, the mainstream community doesn't accept it. And what do? They point to just one study that was done in 2014 that shows no link between bras and breast cancer. But surprise, surprise, that study had no control group. So that would be like studying the link between smoking and lung cancer and not including any non-smokers in your study. So it had no control group. And also it only looked at postmenopausal women in whom the effects of bras causing cancer was much weaker. So, that is the study that the mainstream looks at. So if you Google the issue of bras and breast cancer, you'll find that, this 2014 study comes up all the time to debunk it. But it is the only study out there that has debunked it. There are, I found about, nearly 20 studies that have been done around the world that seem to show pretty conclusive evidence that there is a strong link between bras and breast cancer. The reason being is that it constricts lymph flow. And, where do the toxins and waste products collect in your body? They tend to collect in fatty tissue. And where do we women have fatty tissue? In our breasts. And so, if you're constricting that and not allowing the lymph to flush those toxins and waste products away, you are likely to have things like breast pain, breast cysts, and breast cancer. Those are the possible things that can arise. Doesn't mean it will always arise, but you are increasing your risk.
Wow. And what is the what I know for comfort, for just life in general, for activities, what is another option? Like, instead of wearing bras, like just no bras at all is the
Well,
healthiest part for the
you know,
breast?
it depends on. I mean, if you have small breasts, it's not such a big deal. And I don't wear bras anymore. I threw my bra away. You know, I didn't do it in the 1960s. You know, but I've done it now. But you know, if you have large breasts and you're trying to do sport and you don't want your breasts to move more than the ball on the court, you know, you do maybe need to have some kind of support. But I think you just have to have it judiciously done. You need a bra that's well fitting and not too tight. If you see welts on your arms and shoulders, that's a sign that the thing is too tight. And also, you don't wear it longer than you need to wear it. You don't need to be wearing it at home. You don't need to be wearing it when you sleep at night. It's amazing how many people actually sleep in their bras. And those are the folks that show the highest rates of breast cancer, because it's directly proportional to the amount of time that you wear your bra, the risk of breast cancer. At least that was the research that was in the singer's book, Dress to Kill. So yeah, that's really what you can do. And so if you need to wear a bra, the other thing that is quite helpful, if you've got a business meeting and you don't want your nipples poking out because it makes you look unprofessional, you know, they do have these little gel petals that you can just put on there, and that will solve the problem. I know a lot of women who don't wear bras and don't like to wear bras, but they'll just use those gel petals in a business meeting or whenever they have to look super professional.
Yeah. What is how widespread? What is the rate of breast cancer in women currently?
Well, the statistics that I saw tended to be about 1 in 8, both in the US and in the UK. 1 out of 8 women is likely to be diagnosed with breast cancer in her lifetime. And what it means is that pretty much everybody has been touched by breast cancer, because if you haven't had it, you will know somebody who has had it. And yet, according to the research from the singers, in societies where bras are not worn, like they did some research in Fiji, for example, in those societies, the rate of breast cancer is about the same between men and women. How many men do you know with breast cancer? I only know one, and that's because he has a podcast about it. But you know, I know hundreds of women who've had breast cancer. I don't know any, apart from this one guy, men who've dealt with breast cancer. So if not wearing a bra can reduce your risk down to that, that's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've never heard of a man myself having breast cancer. So that's an interesting one, a new one for me. But I guess there's so many other new things for me over the last couple of years that I never thought I'd ever hear. Like men have the ability to have babies, but that's a whole different topic.
Well, that's a whole different topic. And I know you were talking about hormone blockers. And one comment I'd make about that is that back in the day, hormone replacement therapy, HRT, was seen as a miraculous cure for hot flashes. We didn't need to suffer menopause symptoms anymore. All we needed was HRT. They were increasingly prescribed from the 1960s through to the 1990s. Then, surprise, surprise, it appeared that this treatment caused breast cancer. Oh dear. And now it's fallen into disfavor. So this begs the question, like HRT, are the practices of prescribing puberty blockers to these youngsters with gender dysphoria going to be found to have a lot of unintended consequences, including breast cancer? And for example, osteoporosis is no laughing matter. But up till now, it's mainly been a condition affecting postmenopausal women rather than young people in the prime of life. But, you know, there have been studies. I know, for example, February 3rd, 2021, there was an article in the Daily Mail written by a guy called Joe Pinkstone. He reported on a study showing that puberty blockers impair height, growth, and bone density. You know, some of the doctors who've been dishing out these pills to youngsters say, oh, well, you know, you can reverse this. All you have to do is stop taking them. But you are blocking growth in a key time of their development. These are young, developing kids. They need those hormones to be able to develop properly and not have problems like bone density issues and, shortness of stature and all of that. And of course, there's a very strong likelihood that they will find, just like they found with HRT, that these products cause cancer down the road. So, it actually makes no sense to me that you've got a society here in the US, okay? You have to be over 21 to be deemed to be mature enough to go to a bar and drink alcohol, right?
Yes,
You have to be
absolutely.
over 21. But these youngsters who barely really understand what gender really is all about are being led down this path of transition and given these hormone blockers without really understanding what they're letting themselves in for. And, so how come alcohol is too dangerous for somebody under 21? And yet the hormone blockers are fine. There's a disconnect here. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just continues to blow me away that I'm hearing an echo somehow. But it just blows me away how they continue to doctors continue to say, oh, it doesn't do any harm. It just pauses puberty. It just pauses the development. But it's not like we're watching a video and we can just like fast forward to catch up. I mean, we can't just skip ahead and expect that it's going to be the same path. I don't think that again, it seems that we're getting a lot of lies and manipulations about the treatment, saying that that it's harmless. And I'm sure that you and I had discussions about cancer treatments that were pushed too. That again
Yeah,
talked
that's
about
true.
being harmless.
And that's why the whole issue about breast binding and hormone blockers is very close to me, because having been through breast cancer twice, having been through cancer twice, doing radiation, doing chemo, all of that stuff and surgery, I would not wish it on anyone. I really wouldn't. And, if kids want to experiment, whatever, that's fine. However, they shouldn't be medicalized.
No.
It's ridiculous to medicalize them. And, there was an article reported in the Daily Mail in July of last year. Changing gender was a decision that teenager Kira Bell, for instance, came to deeply regret. And she received treatment at the notorious Tavistock Centre in London that has since been ordered to be shut down. It's a very controversial child gender clinic, and a damning report showed serious ideological malpractice and a lack of concern for the welfare of its young patients. And what seems to have happened, at least according to an article I read in the Times, was that the Tavistock Centre recklessly was prescribing these puberty blockers, pushing youngsters down the path of transitioning rather than addressing other psychological issues that they might have been dealing with. And so what Kira Bell, the lady who had the lawsuit against the Tavistock Centre in London, when she was 16 years old and by her own admission very mentally ill, she was given drugs by the Tavistock Centre doctors to pause her own development before realizing 6 years later, and after undergoing a double mastectomy, that she had made a monumental mistake. And that's another aspect of the medicalization of kids that are apparently showing gender dysphoria. I've heard that gender dysphoric biological females as young as 13 years of age have undergone these mastectomies for cosmetic reasons. And again, just like with the hormone blockers, some doctors have apparently claimed that, well, if these youngsters change their minds, they can always have reconstruction surgery. So this brings me on to another big point that I researched in great detail for my book, My Wild Ride, How to Thrive Whether You Stay or Not, and also because it affected how I chose to have my treatment. Some doctors are saying, yes, breast implants are fine, but that's not true. Breast implant illness is very, very real. And the potential side effects include pain, cancer, and a systemic type of immune dysfunction. So to say, oh, well, if you lop off your breasts, you can always redo them, is complete bullshit. You can't put it any other way, and it's shocking to me because there was a study. As a humorist writer, this study actually was a gift. There was a study that was done, and it was done by these aesthetic surgeons who obviously had a little bit of a vested interest in showing how safe breast implants were. And I wrote a blog about it, and the blog title is "Breast Implant Illness, It's All in Your Head, You Neurotic Woman." Because what happened, this is a study that is so bad that it's good, in a kind of Monty Python way, and I love Monty Python, because these esteemed doctors took women who had had breast implants for cosmetic reasons at a clinic in Holland, and had them fill out questionnaires to work out how neurotic they were. And surprise, surprise, these stupid women who were complaining about breast implant illness, well, they were all neurotic. Well, clearly that was the reason. And so clearly, being neurotic is a prime cause of people complaining about breast implant illness. Well, I wonder then why Nicole DeRuda's breast implant illness Facebook support group has to date 170,000 members. Can they all be neurotic? I joined the group just to, find out what was going on with it. So maybe I'm neurotic too. No, we're not neurotic. It's ridiculous. I know a number of people, personal friends, who had awful symptoms. Some of them didn't know what was hitting them until they finally realized it was the breast implants. And then once they had them removed in what's called explant surgery, they started to feel better. Because it can cause such a wide range of symptoms, ranging from weird headaches, eye pain, weakness, fibromyalgia, cancers. It's just anything can be infected, because these in particular the silicone ones, if the silicone leaks, it's toxic. And even saline implants, they're in a silicone capsule, and that silicone capsule can cause problems in the body. So that it's a very personal issue for me, because when I had breast cancer, and I'll give you a spoiler alert here, I had breast cancer first in 2007. Then I had it again in 2014. I have one of those BRCA genes that makes me more susceptible to breast cancer. But in between, I was advised to have a prophylactic double mastectomy. And I turned it down. Many people thought I was completely nuts. And I did get breast cancer in the other breast afterwards. And again, they asked me if I wanted to have a double mastectomy. And I went for lumpectomy operations for both of my breast cancers. I looked at the research. It didn't seem to me that for my particular circumstances, that having mastectomy was going to be any more beneficial for me than a lumpectomy. And I did not want to deal with the reconstruction afterwards. And most surgeons at least will admit that reconstruction is much more of a serious operation actually than mastectomy. But I didn't want to have any of that. And in fact, many women who have mastectomies are choosing to go flat afterwards rather than deal with the problems of implants and reconstruction surgery.
Yeah, I've known multiple women in my life that had implants and ended up having to have them removed. Multiple different illnesses. One woman, it was taking her life. I mean, she could barely get out of bed. Her entire body was almost like it was not functioning. Like her legs just stopped working very well, and her immune system was collapsing. And it's amazing that that is still something that the FDA or our the governing bodies still approve, is these breast implants that is proven to be toxic and dangerous. But yet, when it comes to cancer, that's all they lop them off and hit you with chemo. And
right.
That seems to be the only answers,
Cut, poison, burn, right? But the thing is, my doctors never warned me about any dangers from breast implants. And in that study, that wonderful study from those esteemed aesthetic surgeons who said that, well, really, it's just, these are just neurotic ladies complaining about breast implant illness. They start in the abstract that starts that study, they talk about there being no link between breast implants and having breast implant illness. They just don't accept that that exists. However, the FDA, even though it is by no means the fastest organization to tell people that something is dangerous and give people good advice necessarily, they are now putting warnings on breast implants. And so I would hope that that will make doctors give women adequate warnings about what they are letting themselves in for if they do have the silicone breast implants. Silicone are probably the most damaging, but the saline can also have issues because they are in a silicone capsule. Then there is the other kind of implant that they do, which is made from fat in your own body. But then that means you have at least a couple of operations instead of one, because they have to harvest the fat from somewhere and then put it in your breasts. And so none of those are really very great solutions, although probably the final way of doing it is most likely the one that will cause you the least damage, because at least you're putting your own tissue back in your own body rather than a very foreign substance that your body has very nasty, your body can have very nasty immune reactions to.
Yeah. I think it seems to me that the root of the overall issue is the societal expectations and the almost psychological operation, it seems to me, that is used against women to to need to alter their body, need to conform to this ideology of what beauty is in our world. And it seems that that's that continues to be an issue, and not just with women, but it's been happening with women for a very long time, especially through the media and the psychological manipulation that has occurred through the media.
Yeah, I remember a terrible motto that my mother used to tell me: "You have to suffer to be beautiful." Oh my God, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And that's, she lived in the days of those stiletto heels where you had to wear those high heels all the time. And all those do is completely damage your Achilles tendon and your ankle. And they're really, really bad for you, and squash your toe into a tiny point at the end. Reminds me of the foot binding. Not quite as bad as the Chinese foot binding, but it's sort of reminds me of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've always been I've always been someone who thinks that natural beauty is so much more attractive than synthetic beauty, than manufactured cosmetic beauty. And so it to me, I've always had a chance to look at it from that perspective, and it's amazing that that warfare, that attack on our young ladies is just so prevalent, so in our faces. And now it's obviously it's changed and it's expanded out to a completely different type of body altering to match a societal expectation. But it's,
Yeah, I mean, there's this idea that all you need to do is sort of move things around, give them a few pharmaceutical drugs, chop a few things off, and you can be whatever sex you want. Well, they don't cover any of the extreme pain and difficulty of any of these surgeries, nor do they cover the health effects of any of these pharmaceutical drugs. We sadly live in a society where so many think we are sort of conditioned to think that, well, we just have to throw a drug at it and we'll be fine. Forget about anything else. The drugs will sort it out. There's a pill to fix you. Don't worry. There's a pill to fix you. That was another thing that when I was going through cancer, they were always trying to see if I was depressed so that they could try and throw some antidepressants at me. No. All of that stuff. I have a section in my book, My Wild Ride, called Pill Popping, which is about all of those different things that they have you got difficulty sleeping? Do you need sleeping pills? And Arianna Huffington in her book, The Sleep Revolution, writes about the horrible side effects of some of those sleeping pills, where people wake up in the middle of the night not knowing what they're doing, and they can be crashing cars or buying stuff on Amazon that they don't even remember that they bought, all kinds of weird stuff like that. So if I don't need something, if I don't need a medication, I'm not going to take it. I'd much rather go the natural route if I can. That's not to say that there's some wonderful things in modern medicine, but if I can avoid taking pills, especially antidepressants and sleeping pills, I definitely will do that.
Yeah, it seems, obviously the financial agenda through the pharmaceutical companies, they want to continue to pad their bottom line so that they, by pushing these only allopathic medicine solutions, where we know, for generations we have had natural solutions, which I'm a huge fan of, for almost everything that we are facing. And I know in a conversation that you and I had, you've tried both realms. You went with more natural therapies as opposed to, and you also went through the approved pharmaceutical treatments. What did you find when you went down an alternative therapy or natural therapy road for your treatment?
Yeah, I mean, I did both. I did chemo and radiation, which my friends who were sort of more hippy dippy, they said, oh, it's toxic and doesn't work. But I also did a lot of alternative stuff. And I found those to be extremely beneficial. One thing that was very helpful was intravenous ozone. I did IV ozone when I was going through chemotherapy, and I found that I had far fewer side effects than anyone else I saw in my clinic. I didn't throw up. I didn't have skin problems. I didn't have digestive problems. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a walk in the park, but I felt pretty good. And so much so that before I finished my chemo, I was supposed to see the radiologist to plan the radiation sessions that would follow the chemotherapy. And she looked at me and she said, you're looking far too healthy to be doing chemotherapy. I hope you're not doing something to negate the effects of the chemo. And I didn't tell her I was doing IV ozone. I didn't really see the point there, but she was basically telling me I did not look sick enough. Now, the chemo did make my hair fall out, so I think it obviously did work systemically. And as you can see, it has grown back, which is good. I clearly didn't look ill enough. That was a comment from a doctor, a nice lady, but, I clearly didn't look sick enough in her eyes. And that's, the whole point. Chemo is supposed to kill the cancer, hopefully before it kills you, because it's extremely toxic. But I even negotiated with my doctor over that, because the original cancer drug they wanted to use, adriamycin, which is also known as the red devil, was a much more toxic chemical than what I asked them to use, which was carboplatin. I had carboplatin and Taxol, and it was more appropriate in the end for the specific kind of cancer that I had. But I don't know if you've got that cartoon because I have a lot of cartoons in my book. There is a cartoon called Friendly Advice. And I would like to say that, I'm talking about the stuff that I'm doing, but I'm not a doctor, and I would never want to be telling other people how they should treat their cancer. But that certainly didn't stop all kinds of people from giving me unsolicited cancer advice. And so the very first cartoon that I have in my book is Friendly Advice. And it's a 4-panel cartoon with advice that I got. The more hippie friend telling me that the chemo and radiation was toxic and wasn't going to work. The straight-laced person telling me that alternative therapy is pure quackery. And then this guy who will remain nameless to protect his reputation said to me, oh, you got cancer because you're too tense. You need to relax. And of course, we all know that shouting at somebody is the best way to make them relax and be calm. Not
100%.
Oh, yeah. And then the final one was about dairy. You know, if you give up dairy, you need to give up dairy, because if you don't, your cancer is going to come back. You know, the food Nazis who attack you with all the things that you're doing that are wrong. But, you know, I'm a Brit. I have to have milk in my tea. I'm not going to put soy milk or oat or any of that rubbish in my tea. So I didn't listen to that. And amazingly, I didn't listen to any of that advice, and I'm still here. At least right now, I'm still here. And I have a Monty Python badge to prove it. I love Monty Python. And this is the Spam-A-Lot badge here. The Spam-A-Lot badge says, I'm not dead yet. So at the moment, at the very least, I'm not dead yet. So whatever I'm doing is working, but who knows, you know, maybe my grave is going to read, here lies CJ Grace, because she refused to lop off her boobs. I don't know. Who knows? It's a crapshoot. Cancer is a crapshoot, you know.
Absolutely. It seems like you've been winning the lottery though so far on when it comes to that. You've been defying the odds through battling that cancer. So congratulations to you, and yeah, I'm glad that you are still here.
Thank you. It
would be tragic. I mean, you know, without you around, and the show certainly wouldn't be happening today. I mean, geez.
Well, you might have a more interesting guest. I don't know.
I don't know. You're a pretty interesting guest. You're a wealth of knowledge, and you've been through so much, and you know, that is really important things to be, that, you know, the community, that people in general need to be woken up to. And that's part of the mission here, you know, at Liberty Arises, to wake people up to the ways that their lives are being manipulated, the way that the information they take in is being manipulated, and, you know, and to know that, like, what their doctors are pushing on them, it might not be the best thing for them, you know, whether it is a jab or an operation. You know, you need to do your own research. You need to trust that your research is much better than somebody who might be making profits off of the information that they're giving you. And so that's a huge thing. And you know, as you know, within the cancer industry, that I think there's a huge agenda there with profits, and how people are advised to approach their treatment.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a non-patentable cure to cancer, you are likely to be shut down faster than if you have a meth lab in your basement, basically. You know, that's not to say there are some alternative cures out there that aren't so good. I mean, but information is power. I think the whole point is to do your research. And as an anal BBC trained journalist, that was what I did. I mean, some people might say, oh, I'm sick, I don't want to deal with doing the research, I'm just going to listen to my doctors. Doctor knows best. That's what makes me feel comfortable. That's fine for that person. But for me, I needed to research every single thing that was suggested to me, because I was the one that would have to face the consequences of doing that procedure or taking that drug or whatever it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, like, you know, that's the key, is that the research is absolutely the key, because there's a lot of agendas to sway you in ways that, you know, might not be so correct. So, and you being a BBC author, I'm sure, or, you know, journalist, you have plenty of experience with the narrative shifting that might occur from, you know, within reports or within information that is allowed to come out.
Right. You know, I was a BBC journalist in the Stone Age, though. And when I remember a story when I was a reporter, I actually got into trouble big time because I refused to do an interview with somebody whose opinion I disagreed with. And my news editor was furious. And he said, how can you not interview somebody just because you disagree with their opinion? That's not why you're a reporter. That's not what news and journalism is about. If you disagree strongly with somebody's opinion, then you find somebody else to present the other point of view. and you have both points of view, but you don't not have that person on just because you disagree with their opinion. And that was back in the 1980s. These days, the whole media landscape is very, very different.
Yeah, very, very different. It seems like the entire thing has been controlled in a major way right now, and the only it's more of a propaganda machine and less of a journalistic machine.
Well, there are certain views that are not tolerated. So and there's no debate. And sadly, that's very bad for democracy, because democracy is about debate. It's about conflicting opinions. And if you censor opinions that don't follow the mainstream narrative, you are really restricting democracy. And it's the unpopular opinions, it's the unpopular news, it's the unpopular views that need protecting. The mainstream popular view doesn't need protection against censorship because it'll get out there. It's the unpopular views, it's the less mainstream views that need the most protection from censorship.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing because once the unpopular view gets out there, it gets pushed, and then all of a sudden it turns into this level of perception that it is the popular view, and we see that right now with the difference of what's happening on now that Twitter has kind of been restored back to a place where there's equal voices being allowed to be heard, and the censorship has been toned down quite a bit. We're seeing how unpopular that the pushed popular belief truly is, in comparison to what we're seeing on the mainstream news channel.
Yeah, and it's sad that there is a complete loss of nuance. There's a complete loss of the center, so that you get very polarized views, and no way that these two views can be reconciled. Whereas in the days when I was a journalist, you would be able to discuss, say, the policies of both parties, and you'd find good things and bad things for both of them, and you'd be able to discuss that in a very measured way. You'd have debates, you'd have conversations, and now it doesn't seem like that's popular to do. That's not you either have one view or the other. And I actually wrote an article for Thrive Global about it, us versus them, the perils of perilous polarization. And polarization creates a very divided society. And it creates a lack of empathy, and a lack of community in a lot of ways. And I think it's a very sad thing that we don't have more nuance in debate and in political discussion, that we don't have more nuance in reporting. It doesn't seem like, and the other problem that we have is that we have this 24-hour news cycle. You have the blogosphere, and people will just put things up because they need to have clickbait and they need to have page views, and they don't need to have any, whatever they put up doesn't have to be that accurate, or there's no fact checking in the original meaning of the word, rather than the kind of fact checkers that were previously working on Twitter before Elon Musk fired them. But it's a shame that we don't have the kind of debate, the kind of interchange between people of opposing views that we used to in the days when I was originally doing journalism.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we go back into looking at where this all began, it really is that we'll say secret agencies' ideals of what information can and can't be disseminated to the population. And we talk about, you were mentioning earlier, we were talking about China and Beijing a little bit. And we take a look at communist countries like China, like what has come out of in the Russia press, and there's only it's state controlled media, right? And we're led to believe in this Western free world, that it's a free and fair media, which has just become an illusion, where it really is just not necessarily state-controlled media, but more of a globalist-controlled media, more of a globalist elite-controlled media. And it's interesting how when luckily with the gifts of these alternative news platforms, the citizen journalists, we've slowly started to get beyond that smokescreen narrative warfare that has been plagued, and the control of controlled information, and hopefully in the future that we get to diverge from that information control and allow things to sneak beyond the smoke screen or the curtain of the Great Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, because I worked for China Radio International, Radio Beijing, back in the 1980s as a journalist advisor. And that was a very illuminating experience to see how they dealt with news. Interestingly, at that time, they didn't really care too much about censoring international news. A lot of what they reported was straight off the what we call the rip and read from Reuters in the news, but it was the Chinese news, the news about what was going on in China, that was very heavily controlled, because they thought, well, who cares about the rest of the world? But we're definitely going to control what the Chinese people know about China. And they were. People don't seem to realize how controlled things are in China. I mean, Xi Jinping, the current premier, he very much sees himself as a sort of reincarnation of Mao Zedong, very expansionist, very controlling. He has set in motion a surveillance system that is unparalleled, I believe, in the world for the citizens, the social credit system. So I'm sure there are folks in other countries would love to institute exactly as they have there. The social credit system is something that the Chinese people cannot opt out of, and you are judged according to your behavior, what you buy, who you consort with, what your views are. Everything that that you do online is recorded. And if your scores aren't high enough, you will find that you cannot get a loan, you don't get a job, you can't be on a train or travel on a plane, or it can infringe your liberty completely if you don't get good enough scores in your social credit system. So China is a lesson for the West to look at, because that's where things can go if certain measures are taken to extremes. And if you look at what they did during COVID, where they had lockdowns and people didn't have enough food to eat, and they were actually throwing themselves out of windows, committing suicide in places like Shanghai because things were so bad. So yeah, I mean, every country has censorship. Some countries just have more censorship than others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's really what the agenda is going forward with the CBDC, the central bank digital currency system, is really seems to be the method to move that social currency system into the West. The only thing really standing in the way of implementing that is, seems to me, the U.S. Constitution and the First and Second Amendments specifically, but it seems like that's the agenda, and they're slowly trying to peel away the layers of the Constitution in order to put into place that model that China has erected. And even people like Klaus Schwab and Noah Harari from the World Economic Forum last week at Davos actually were speaking of that in general, that the model that we should be focusing on turning the entire planet into is that Chinese model.
I certainly was quite happy to be leaving China. I mean, I'm glad I had the experience of working there. There were some wonderful people that I worked with, but the system is such that you have to live in it to really understand what it's like. You can't really understand it until you've lived it, and how much control there is, and how it's taken for granted that that control exists. It's mind blowing. It was Mao Zedong in many ways was able to create an entire police prison state. And a lot of the things that Deng Xiaoping, who succeeded him, did, he was able to roll back quite a lot of those controls. He was actually one of the best things that ever happened to China, and he had all kinds of reforms, including term limits, which was a fantastic thing for China. And guess what? Xi Jinping rolled that back and got rid of term limits. So he's there for life.
Yeah, the CCP the CCP agenda is really like, not only specifically taken over all of China, but has spread throughout its agenda to dominate the world like everywhere.
Yeah.
I actually just saw there's a great documentary. If it's a long one, it's 2.5 hours or so. Just was released on Epoch Times, but it's called "The Final War," and it documents the entire Chinese agenda, the CCP. And I want to just say, right, it's different. The Chinese people are not the CCP. The CCP is not the Chinese people. Love the Chinese people, but or as Steve Bannon calls them, the Lao Baijing. But we do know that the CCP itself is a brutal and ruthless, patient, cartel that basically has agendas to specifically destroy America, and that's in their spoken plans, and
Yeah. They're very good at soft power, what they call
yeah,
soft power. And to give you just one example that I knew about because I worked for China Radio International and Radio Beijing. So they have been expanding the number of languages they broadcast in, the number of countries that Radio Beijing is available in. At the same time, the BBC was restricting and cutting back on the number of languages that the BBC World Service was broadcasting in. So, and that was, in terms of geopolitics, that was a pretty short-sighted move to do, so that the Chinese companies often own very key businesses in the West, and people don't even realize it. They own apparently a substantial amount of Forbes magazine. And once that happened, the journalists that were reporting on the democracy movement in the democracy protests in Hong Kong, and who weren't necessarily writing about China in a positive light, those journalists were either found that they lost their positions, or they had to only produce articles that showed China in a positive light. And that's what happens when they control organs of the press in foreign countries. The main reason why that happens is so that these particular organizations will report on China in a very positive way.
Yes.
And they call it soft power. It's funny because my youngest son spent a year abroad at a university in Beijing, Zhemin Daxue, the People's University of China, one of the top social science universities in Beijing. And there was a wonderful comment that came out by from one of his lecturers, who said, well, the reason why the West criticizes China about their treatment of Tibet is that our propaganda just wasn't good enough. As simple as that. Not good enough propaganda,
Yeah.
There you go.
Wow.
And the treatment of the people in Tibet and in Xinjiang is absolutely appalling and hardly reported on in the West. There are massive concentration camps, and I'm using that in the concentration camps is often an overused word that, I'm a child of Holocaust survivors, but these are genuine concentration camps that Tibetan and Uyghur people from Xinjiang are put into. There is genocide, in effect, going on in those areas in China that is barely reported on. It's very, very serious.
Yeah, we know the story quite often hits the air about the Tibetan people and the way that Tibet was wiped out, and but they're still facing prosecution, and we really don't hear any persecution, but we don't really hear much of that anymore these
And
days.
Xinjiang, they don't report much. Xinjiang, where the Muslim Uyghur people are, that incredible persecution and imprisonment of people there.
Yeah, there's, if correct me if I'm wrong, but there's been millions of Uyghurs that have been either imprisoned or murdered, disappeared over
Yep.
the last decade or so.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it's interesting. It was great to see that over the last couple months, with the really repressive lockdowns that occurred in China, how many people were standing up, and how that power of those riots in the streets, the protests really seemed to actually get the attention of those in charge, and they did roll back those really repressive and tyrannical mandates. But when we were talking about that, it brought back images of Tiananmen Square. It brought back that picture of the fist of the totalitarian Chinese government squashing the little person, and that was something that I think many were scared of. But it seemed like the population uprising was larger than it has ever been through the history of China that I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I was. It happened shortly after I left China, and what I heard was that the protesters camped in Tiananmen Square, democracy protesters. A lot of students, a lot of professional people were there, and the government sent in troops from Beijing and from the local area from Beijing, and they refused to fire on the people. They didn't want to do anything. So instead, the government sent in troops from outside Beijing, and this hasn't been reported, but it's what actually happened. And in order for them to make these troops much more aggressive than they would normally be, they told them that there was a lot of disease in the encampments in the square where the protesters were, and they said they had to have vaccinations to protect them from these diseases. And they weren't vaccinations, they were in fact amphetamines. And so they got the troops in there, and they were incredibly trigger happy. And from what I heard from somebody I know who was there, they were even shooting the soda sellers on the corner, on the side of the street, who had nothing to do with the demonstrations. And the reason why they found out that the troops had been shot full of amphetamines was that doctors who were treating troops who were injured in the clashes, and along with all of the many thousands of protesters who were injured and killed, but the troops all showed very high levels of amphetamine in their systems. So that was the story that I heard, and I believe it's true that was how they managed to get the troops to react very aggressively against the protesters in Tiananmen Square. That started, it was June the 3rd, 1989. The evening of June the 3rd was when they started, when that protest happened. And what was remarkable was that Radio Beijing, the government organization, which had maybe 10 minutes of live broadcasting a day, very little was live, it was mostly pre-recorded. Well, the people who were doing that broadcast heard that a couple of their comrades from Radio Beijing were killed by troops in that demonstration. They were furious, and they actually broadcast on air for just under 2 minutes about what happened.
And that's the clip that you sent me, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, let's what do you say we take a listen to it?
Yeah, it's a little piece of history, and it shows that even people who are in government-controlled organizations who knew they were going to be detained afterwards will speak the truth.
All right. Well, let's we have some audio here, and let's listen to this broadcast. It's about 2 minutes long, you said?
Yeah, just under 2 minutes.
Excellent.
It's that little.
中国国际广播电台.
This is Radio Beijing.
This is Radio Beijing. Please remember June the 3rd, 1989. The most tragic event happened in the Chinese capital, Beijing. Thousands of people, most of them innocent civilians, were killed by fully armed soldiers when they forced their way into the city. Among the killed are our colleagues at Radio Beijing. The soldiers were riding on armored vehicles and used machine guns against thousands of local residents and students who tried to block their way. When the army convoys made a breakthrough, soldiers continued to spray their bullets indiscriminately at crowds in the street. Eyewitnesses say some armored vehicles even crushed foot soldiers who hesitated in front of the resisting civilians. Radio Beijing English Department deeply mourns those died in a tragic incident and appeals to all its listeners to join our protest for the gross violation of human rights and the most barbarous suppression of the people. Because of the abnormal situation here in Beijing, there is no other news we could bring you. We sincerely ask for your understanding and thank you for joining us at this most tragic moment.
Wow.
It was unbelievable that they actually did that. And I did hear that although the announcer was detained, that I think eventually everybody involved with that broadcast ended up escaping to the United States. That's what I heard.
Wow. Wow. Well, it's great that they got out. I bet you that doesn't not everyone gets out from the Chinese party and
Oh my God.
after doing something like that.
Normally they'd probably find themselves under a death sentence. I mean, that was more the common way of dealing with things. And what I heard was that one of the reasons why the Tiananmen protest got so as far as it did was that there was a power struggle going on in the Politburo, which distracted them from reacting speedily to that demonstration. Because normally what they would do is if there were protests, the foreign press would never hear about it. But there was I think Gorbachev was in town at the time. And so tons of foreign journalists were in Beijing during the time of that protest. But normally what would happen is that there would be a protest. The authorities would photograph everybody. They would wait for the people to go home to their various homes, and then they would arrest them and throw them all in jail, and a lot of them would disappear. That was their standard operating technique in terms of dealing with protests. But the trouble was that they had a bit of a power struggle. The protest was happening also when there was a public event with a lot of foreigners involved. So that was why it became something that the foreign news heard about and covered. A lot of foreign journalists were actually injured, roughed up and injured by the troops as well at the time.
Wow. What an event for getting an echo again here.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, wow. What a great wild time in history with them people actually having the courage to stand up against such a authoritarian tyrannical government. Do you see parallels with the current uprising that just happened, the most recent uprising? With the people, the way that it was a people-driven movement, and it seemed like to be much more widespread than just in Beijing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of it, we didn't get as much news out as we would like because so much of it is controlled. But it was heartening that actually something was done. But this time it was so incredibly egregious because they were basically incarcerating these people in their homes when some of them weren't even sick. And if they were sick, it was not a very virulent form, because Omicron was much less virulent than the earlier forms of COVID. And the people that were being locked up, they didn't have access to food. They weren't allowed to leave their homes. In some cases, they were boarding up the doors of people's homes in these apartment buildings to prevent them from getting out there. And so it was egregious. It was seriously egregious, more so than a lot of what they've done before. And I think that if you push people far enough, they will finally rebel. There's so many. There is that frog in the water syndrome, when you do things slowly and gently, and people don't. And they suddenly realize that they're in a prison, and they didn't realize at the beginning. But this was so damn obvious that you couldn't, and it was so quick that they would just have these quarantines and these whole apartment buildings, and millions of people would be in effect incarcerated. And that was, people knew about it. Everybody has mobile phones. They were passing on information to their relatives and friends. So this was known throughout China, what was going on, somewhat. So that's why there was the reaction that we saw. And it got to be on such a scale that the government had to react. They couldn't ignore it. And what they most likely did, and I vaguely remember reading about it, is they like to blame somebody else. So they blamed the local authority or whatever for reacting incorrectly. So the central government, when they don't like the results, they'll blame the local government, and they'll have somebody as a fall guy, so they can say, well, it wasn't us, the central government, it was because these local officials didn't react correctly.
Yeah.
Standard thing. I mean, and one of Xi Jinping's standard tools, whenever he comes across anybody that he doesn't like or anything that he doesn't like, he has his campaign against corruption, and so he can say that this particular official whose actions he didn't like was corrupt, and that's a good reason to be able to arrest them and make them disappear.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems that it seems to me, there's been a lot of talk about the economy of China starting to really start to crash with things like Evergrande, being collapsing, and there was a lot of questions, a lot of curiosity and speculations whether realistically these lockdowns weren't necessarily about a virus, but it was about preventing a run on the banks and a collapse of their overall economic and banking structure. Because I know a lot of banks were frozen, where you couldn't take money out, and they really had the opening of the door to shift to a CBDC, the central bank. And now I believe they just rolled out the digital yuan, right? I think that's what it's called.
I don't know a lot about that particular issue, but it was one of the problems was that even trying to order stuff online, these people were unable to get what they needed. Nobody was delivering, and nobody was able to get anything. And I mean, when you deny people food and you deny them the ability to leave their homes, you do get a pushback. And whether or not it was a smokescreen for the collapse of the banking system or the collapse of the economy, I don't know. I can't really speak for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just it was speculation that a lot of people had, some economists that I've been listening to, and I just wonder, what that's going to look like going forward, and as we spread out into the rest of the planet, because the ripple effects obviously will occur, right? With an economy as large as China, it's going to be interesting to watch going forward.
Yeah, well, we needed a lot of. I mean, there were so many Chinese products that were being imported into the US, and so many raw materials that were coming in from China, rare earth materials and stuff like that. So they do play a key role in the world economy. So if that economies destabilize, then it will obviously have a ripple effect for the rest of the world.
Yeah, yeah, truly, truly. Wow, it's amazing your wealth of experience, your wealth of knowledge, and covers so many topics. It's such a pleasure to spend this time with you and sit down and go from breast binding and hormones all the way to news reporting in China. So I'm very, very honored to be able to do that. Is there any other things that that's on your heart right now that you have interested? What are some of the things that you're looking at going forward?
Well, I mean, my subjects are pretty straight and narrow in a way. I mean, I've written my first book, Adulterer's Wife: How to Thrive Whether You Stay or Not, was about infidelity. And the mantra of that book was that the best revenge is to get past the need for revenge. It was a comedy self-help book. And then my second book was more of a comedy self-help memoir, My Wild Ride: How to Thrive After Breast Cancer and Infidelity. So that's a comedy self-help again, but it's also a wealth of information, because I used a lot of research to do it. And my aim, my mission as a writer, as an author, as a speaker, is to help people use adversity as a catalyst to actually make their lives better than before. And it is possible to do that, and I have some resources on my website, cjauthor.com, that can help. I've got a free PDF about breast cancer. I've got a free PDF about infidelity, and really that's my aim. My aim is to reduce suffering if possible, and one of the ways I try and do that is with humor and nuance and information. Humor, nuance, being informed. Three really important things to have a happier, more successful life.
Absolutely, yeah. That's something I think we need so much more of in this life is humor, and for you to be able to approach such powerful topics with humor is that's a skill and an art.
Yeah, if you don't laugh, you cry, and I'd much rather laugh.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I don't remember who it was, but somebody said laughing and crying do the same things, but it just feels a lot better to laugh. So what's next on your mission? Are you've got something new in the works? I know you have some blog posts and such.
Yeah, I mean, the blog post I posted today was, are infidelity surveys worthless? And the reason why I put that in is because of all this information that's coming out that is really based on spurious online surveys. And it's not just in the infidelity world, it's pretty much anything. And it sort of trades up the chain to appear in mainstream media as fact, all of these fairly spurious surveys, so that you can dig up your statistics and come up with a conclusion that you want. I mean, I know that it's true in so many fields, in healthcare and in politics and all of that people can bring out statistics, and when you really dig deep in there, you find that, as Malcolm Kendrick says in his wonderful book Doctoring Data, that they have made a relative mountain out of an absolute molehill. In other words, using relative figures to make a claim. When you look at the absolute figures, the claim is pretty worthless. So I thought I would do that, at least for my subject, which is infidelity, because one of the things that I'm always asked when I do my interviews on infidelity, which I didn't really talk about here because it's not necessarily the subject that you discuss on Liberty Rise, but people are always asking me about infidelity statistics, and really most of them are worthless. They're all over the map. And so I thought, well, I'll write a blog about that. So I did. But my next project, which is completely unrelated to your subject, it's just the crazy stuff to do with my infidelity humor. Every Christmas, I write about 12 Christmas gifts for your cheating ex. And I find crazy stuff, spoof gifts, when I go to yard sales and stuff like that. And I do this every year. And my next book is going to be 100 gifts for your cheating ex. And it's not about sending your cheating ex dead fish in the mail. No, it's more just gentle humor, having a laugh, seeing some really crazy stuff. And I've already done 6 years of those. So I think that's my next project, to make that into a book. 100 Gifts for Your Cheating Ex. Just something to make you laugh, because laughter, as I said, it's wonderful therapy.
Absolutely, yeah. And infidelity is such a, I mean, again, coming back to the agendas that I was talking about, it's kind of seems that there's been this push for temptation throughout society in order to break down that nuclear family, in order to sort of break apart the fabric of society and of, of relationships. And I think that's been pushed through the press a lot. That's been pushed through movies and the over sexualization in advertising. And so, that is an incredibly, infidelity is an incredibly important and potent topic, especially if we're going to, as a society, move forward with more structured, not structured necessarily, but more foundational relationships that are lasting. And that's been a long, interesting topic in the debate of even whether fidelity is a human thing, like whether we were meant to be these not be in committed relationships. There's a whole group of people who want to continue to push that concept out
The
there.
polyamory thing, and it's kind of funny, because since I've written a book on infidelity, people seem to think I'm terribly pro it, which I have to say, no, I'm not a fan, sorry. And so they try and invite me to their polyamory groups, and I say, no, I'm not interested. Oh, but they're very nice people. No, not interested. That wasn't my thing. If I really feel love for somebody, I don't really want to be fooling around with somebody else, nor do I want them to be fooling around with somebody else. And if people start to wander off, that often means it can often be a symptom as much as a cause. It means that things aren't right, and maybe the two of you shouldn't be together. But you cannot really have infidelity in a relationship without having a certain amount of deception involved, and deception will always put barriers between the two parties. So, obviously there are always exceptions to the rules, and people who seem to work it out, and there are celibate marriages for various reasons where the parties wander because of that. And and I write about a lot of that in my book. But as far as I'm concerned personally, I'm not really a fan of infidelity. Doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I fully agree. I'm actually in the a month out from getting married myself.
Oh,
And
congratulations!
thank you so much. And it's I look forward for me, I have very conservative ideals and beliefs, and I think that the foundation of trust that is needed in order to maintain a committed relationship is the powerful building blocks of growth for a person, for a couple. And when you get that wishy-washy polyamory kind of multi-partner ideology, it really leaves you striving for more, and opens up this door for lies, deception, manipulation, and a lack of truth and honesty in a lot of ways.
Lack of commitment, lack of really, when the shit hits the fan, if you're just wandering off from one to the other, who cares? You just leaves the person hanging.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a lack of commitment. It's a lack of really, in my mind anyway, I know it's a lack of commitment, a lack of really caring and really loving that person.
Absolutely. And if we're going to go forward with strong nuclear families that are going to repopulate this earth, which is going to be necessary soon, we need good morals and ideals and foundations to raise these future children in. So I think that's a incredibly important mission for humanity. So teaching people about infidelity, that's the temptation's always there, right? That with our current society.
Yeah, and I have to say I know a lot of cases because I did a lot of research from my first book, Adulterous Wife, where, and it's usually, although it's changing now, but it's usually the guy that tends to wander, especially if they work outside the home and travel a lot. And then they get tempted by a sweet young thing, much younger than them, and breaks up their marriage. They get married to this person, and then they find that they really regret what they've done. And they find that they have nothing in common with this person. They just had fabulous teenagery sex for a short while. And then once that goes away, there's nothing left. And they wish that they hadn't broken up their marriage over it. That is more common a story than you would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, CJ, we got a few minutes left. We're reaching the end of our time. I was wondering if you wanted to just close with a message for our audience. Is there something that you want to just tell our audience and leave in their minds before we leave?
Yeah, there is always hope. Whether the adversity you're dealing with is breast cancer, infidelity, or any of these pretty dreadful things that Scott is reporting on from in his shows, there's always hope. And it's like walking a tightrope. You want to be aware of the bad stuff. You want to be informed. You want to know what's going on. But you also want to be positive and happy enough to be able to live a fulfilling life. And so having that balance is key, and having the hope for the future that you want to create is also key. You can create your future. You can have what you need. You just have to work towards it. It's not an automatic, easy thing, but never give up. Always have hope. And if you want to find out more about me, just go to my website, cjauthor.com. That's cjauthor.com. And that's really it. Keep your hope and keep laughing and keep your attitude to nuance. Always have empathy for the other side, because if you have empathy, if you listen, even if you don't agree, you can have some understanding, and that may even help you deal with that and cope with it better and overcome. If you listen, if you understand opposing views, you will have a much better understanding of how to go forward with what you want to do.
Absolutely. So right here, CJ Author is right there on the screen, and the links to CJ's books are in the description of the video, as well as some other links to her blogs and such. Is there any? Are you on social media as well? Can they find you on social media?
LinkedIn, CJ Grace @CJ Grace is my handle for LinkedIn, for Instagram, for YouTube. I'm not very active on Twitter, and I hardly do anything on Facebook except join groups. Facebook I find to be find it a bit of a toxic platform, to be honest. And life is having gone through with breast cancer twice, life's too short to spend too much time on Facebook.
Yeah.
I like real friends, flesh and blood friends rather than Facebook friends, I have to say. But anyway, so yeah, @cjgraceauthor.com. And if you go to cjauthor.com, my website, you will find all the links to social media as well. So there you go. That's it. And do download my PDFs about breast cancer and infidelity. Hope they help.